the United Firefighters Union and the firefighters themselves have said to me over the years that they've had to fight in relation to proving their claims about the 12 related cancers, and I was very pleased to be able to talk to the union officials, talk to fireys in their fire stations and also their families about this legislation. So we decided to approve the fact that this is an issue for not only them but also for our government, and to make sure that we had this embodied in legislation. And my colleague, the Treasurer, Curtis Pitt, who's the Industrial Relations Minister, will be bringing forward this legislation to Parliament so that it is embodied in law forevermore, that our firefighters will be able to get assistance where they're needed without having to prove, going through courts, or prove that they have this issue, these medical diseases like these 12 related fire cancers, and that they'll be able to move on and get treatment a lot more quickly. Well, the Newman government obviously failed miserably in relation to, number one, accepting that it was an important issue for firefighters, and also secondly, they had 3 years to be able to put it into the Parliament and legislate, but they didn't do it. And I'm very grateful for the fact that Labor is now elected to government, and this is one of the first things that we've been able to do as a new government in Queensland. We respect our firefighters. We believe that they do a great job in our community. They look after us, so it's the least we can do to look after them if they contract one of these cancer-related diseases. Curtis Pitt, who is the Treasurer of Queensland, he has instructed his department to start writing this legislation. It is quite a process within the government to draft up legislation, so his department, I'm sure, will be talking to the Parliamentary Council of Queensland, and they will together appropriately have discussions, and they will draw up the legislation. So what happens is it then goes to the Queensland Cabinet, then it will go to the Queensland Labor Caucus, and then into the Parliament of Queensland. It'll be introduced as a bill, then it will go out to a parliamentary committee for consultation further in the community. So it's quite a long process, but the good thing is it started off within the first 4 months of our government. I know Curtis will not dilly-dally, he'll be getting on with it, so the sooner that this legislation is drawn up, the better, but I know it's one of our signature pieces of legislation that will be brought into the Parliament hopefully very soon, but obviously it depends on the timetable within the Parliament itself. I haven't heard of anyone being against this legislation. I know that the firefighters and their families are very grateful that we've moved so quickly. Well, it's better to have issues like this in legislation, and that's because it's much harder to unpick it when it's in legislation than it not being in legislation. It's very important for us because workplace health and safety is an important issue for any Labor government, but particularly a Palaszczuk Labor government. We believe that the firefighters do a fantastic job in our community. We know that they work long shifts. We know that that they are devoted to our community, and what we're saying to them is we have listened, we know your concerns, we're acting on these concerns, and we also do not want them being delayed in getting help if they contract these diseases. Cost impacts are always recognised when the legislation's brought into the Parliament. So when legislation is tabled in the Parliament, there's always what they call a green and explanatory notes, and in those explanatory notes they look at any cost implications for the government, and they also look at consultation, who the government has consulted with, the outcomes of those consultations. That will all be considered when the legislation goes before the Parliament in its first reading. I think it's very good legislation that's being written, and I think that it is good for the firefighting community as well as workers in general to know that we as a government care about them.